Let's go ahead and start today's session with just a few prayers. Those of you who are new to Buddhism, we're going to start on page 73. But these prayers, especially this first one, is really just about aligning ourselves with the Buddha by paying homage to the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't need our homage. The Buddha's kind of in a state of complete enlightenment, complete development. But we're simply trying to connect with the Buddha and his teachings by virtue of making this strong prayer of homage to him. So we're going to recite that praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, that first verse there on that page, 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Now turn the page, and on 75 we'll continue in the middle of that page where the verse that starts with homage to the Supreme Buddha. We're continuing to pay homage, and then we recall some of the Buddha's fundamental teachings in the next few verses, and we'll go to the middle of page 76. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all Abraham's atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And go forward to either 97 or 98. We have 2 different versions of the prayer book, so you're looking for the short mandala offering prayer, which will be either at the bottom of 97 or the top of 98. I'm just going to do that single verse, and while we're doing that, we can just imagine the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful pure land, a Buddha paradise, if you will, that represents kind of your own future purification as well as what all sentient beings can enjoy, because all Buddhas, or all sentient beings have Buddha nature. They all can attain that state of Buddhahood as well. So we're making this vast pure offering to receive the teachings, to connect with our gurus, our teachers. And then when we finish that verse, we'll go down to the Idam Guru line, which is on page 98, this Sanskrit, that means, to my precious Guru, I make this jeweled mandala offering. And then finally, the refuge and bodhicitta prayer that's on 98. We'll do that to conclude. And that will be once in English and twice in Tibetan. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jang Chu Bardu Dakni Kyab Suchi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Jola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shok Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyab Suchi Daki Chunyan Gi Pesunam Gi Jola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shok. Okay, let's before we do the class, let's do a short meditation as we usually do. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit. And then on the basis of that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set a good motivation for being here. This motivation of bodhicitta that we just recited the prayer on, but we'll do a little more work with that mind. This is what we talked about in last week's teaching as well, was how we cultivate this mind of bodhicitta. So we're going to begin with just a few minutes of silent meditation on the breath. Just find a good meditation posture for your body, one where the back is somewhat upright, the head upright as well, but then relaxing into this posture, trying to release tension where you find it, particularly in the neck and shoulder area. Might be other parts of your body where you feel some tenseness, some tightness. Just try to soften into those areas. And then when you're ready, you can begin to pay attention to the breath. And if you already have a technique that you prefer to use, then you can do that. If not, then I'll suggest tuning into the sensation that occurs just inside the tip of the nose as you breathe in and out through the nostrils. Tuning into the breath, just try to stay present with the breath through the inhalation, through the exhalation. But in any of our meditations, when we see that the mind has wandered away from the object of meditation, wandered away from the breath, then at that time the job is to correct it, to let go of whatever it was that distracted you, whatever thoughts or sensations, what came into the mind that pulled you away. Just let that go and return to the breath gently. So even if you have to do this a number of times over the next few minutes, it's perfectly fine. We're just training our minds to be a bit more focused, have a bit more concentration. So I'll ring the chime, we'll begin this short period of meditation, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So now let's put our attention towards generating a good motivation for being here. And as we've been seeing in this text we've been going through, our training in the stages of the path to enlightenment is built upon different levels of motivation. And each of us might begin our study and practice of the Buddha's teachings primarily from a point of view of simply wanting to be happier in this life, wanting to have more peace, wanting to not be so troubled by things that arise in our lives. There's nothing wrong with kind of starting with that point, to recognize that this is indicating our fundamental desire to be happy, to not suffer. So even in this life, we can use the Buddha's teachings in a very skillful way to have more peace. But in the stages of the path, this is a very limited motivation. Why? Because this life is going to come to an end. We have to be concerned about what comes after this life. So the very first level of the 3 levels of the stages of the path is based on the motivation of having concern for one's future lives. If we've worked with this concept of rebirth, perhaps we have some conviction in it. If we're new to this idea, then again, we can just entertain that possibility. Make this a bit of a hypothesis. What happens after this life? In Buddhist terms, the mind goes on to another existence. There is a continuity of our minds that goes back without any beginning, goes forward without any end. So the first level of motivation to bring to these teachings is to want to accomplish a good rebirth, to have a state as good as this one in our next life, this perfect human rebirth that we currently possess, where we have the intellect and the abilities to be able to work with the Buddhist teachings, to change our minds, to develop our qualities. Then we went on to the second level of the stages of the path, where we look at the big picture and the understanding that because we've been going from life to life since beginningless time, and will continue to do so, we have to have a concern that goes beyond just our next rebirth, that wants to put an end to this process once and for all, to be rid of what we call samsara, the cycling in existence, and achieve what's called nirvana, the true peace that comes when we have tamed everything that is disturbing our minds. So this is the second level of motivation, to be here today with the aim of your own nirvana, your own peace, your liberation from suffering, from dissatisfaction, from all the causes of that. And then we finally arrive at the third level of the stages of the path, the greatest motivation we can bring to our spiritual practice, which is this mind of bodhicitta. The first 2 levels were concerned primarily with ourselves. Here we advance our motivation to think of others. And just as we saw that we ourselves are driven by a fundamental desire to be happy, to not suffer, it's the same for all beings. Whether they be insects or mammals or fish or birds or creatures that are quite small in this world, or whether they be in all the various realms of existence, every single being is driven by this fundamental desire to avoid what is painful, to experience what is more pleasurable, enjoyable, what brings happiness. Moreover, we are connected to those beings. As we examined last week, those beings have actually taken care of us in unbelievable ways in many lifetimes. Even in this life, we depend upon the kindness of others in a variety of ways. So to be only concerned about our own welfare would be quite selfish. While we need to generate those levels of motivation to understand fully our own situation, at this third level of the stages of the path, we use that same understanding to see all sentient beings as being in the same predicament as ourselves, all wanting to be happy, all wanting to not suffer. And we generate the motivation that is determined to help them to have happiness, to help them to be free from suffering. And the recognition that in order to accomplish that, we have to become enlightened ourselves. We have to join the ranks of the Buddha and all the other enlightened beings who work effortlessly, tirelessly for the sake of all sentient beings. So this is the mind of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, to gain the state of full enlightenment in order to accomplish the welfare of all beings. And really bring that level of motivation, if you can, deeply into your heart, so that everything we do today becomes a cause for that result. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and do what we've been doing, which is to read the verses that we've already gone through for this first part. This practice that you have in front of you, again, the little white photocopied pamphlet there, which once more you're welcome to take with you when you leave, if you'd like to use that as a daily practice. If you go to page 7 of that, this first part is called The Method to Transform a Suffering Life into Happiness, including Enlightenment. And Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's our spiritual director, gave us this practice as advice to begin our day. Hopefully some of you have been using it as a means to start your day. And there's the very first prayer is called a direct meditation on the graduated path, the stages of the path, containing all the important meanings, all the important points. So we've been going through this. This goes on just for a few pages through page 9. But essentially it's covering, again, what we call the stages of the path, or the Lam Rim in Tibetan. Gives us an entire overview of everything that the Buddha taught. And we've been going into a little bit more detail on some of these because it's important to have that as a backdrop for when you recite these words, because otherwise the words, they mean something and you're reciting them, but it's important to have the understanding that is behind all of this. So let's read the first 3 verses, which is the 2 at the bottom of 7 and the 1 at the top of page 8. Essence encompassing all the Buddhas, originator of all the holy Dharma of scripture and realization, principle of all the Aryas intending virtue, in the glorious holy Gurus I take refuge. Please, Gurus, bless my mind to become Dharma, Dharma to become the path, and the path to be without obstacles. Until I achieve Buddhahood, please bless me to be like youthful Norsang and Bodhisattva, always crying, incorrectly following the virtuous friend with pure thought and action, seeing whatever is done as pure, and accomplishing whatever is said and advised. So these first few verses, we begin with a verse of refuge, which is about taking refuge in the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The Buddha being those enlightened beings, such as the Buddha of this era, the Dharma being the teachings that the Buddhas give, and then the Sangha being the spiritual community that supports us on our path. And so we're seeing those all embodied in our gurus. Again, the gurus, the lamas, those beings who have amazing qualities. The word guru in the Sanskrit technically means heavy with qualities, beings who we see as having advanced their minds to a great degree, perhaps even being Buddhas, but we're trying to hold them in a very special light. Why? Because all the beings of the past have relied upon gurus, have relied upon teachers to gain enlightenment. This is how we achieve enlightenment, is by relying on our spiritual teachers. So these are those special beings in our lives, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, who's to the right of His Holiness, Lama Yeshe, who's our founder. He's passed away, but he's his reincarnation, Osalhita, is around and doing wonderful things with our organization. So there are those beings that we might look to in particular that we have a special relationship with, but each of you might have your own gurus, people who you've developed that type of relationship with. So these first few verses are about recognizing that when we've met with the teachings through the kindness of these gurus, we want to make sure we align ourselves as much as possible with their intentions, trying to follow their advice, to be in line with what they're teaching. So these are the first few verses. I'm not going to say much more on that. Let's go ahead and read the next one, which is, as it says at the end of it, the graduated path of the lower capable being, the first level that we just meditated on briefly. So let's read that together. Please bless me to see that this greatly meaningful body with freedoms and richnesses is difficult to find and easily perishes, that action and result are so profound and that the sufferings of the evil-gone transmigratory beings are so difficult to bear. Therefore, please bless me to take refuge from the depths of my heart in the three rare sublime ones, to abandon negative karma, and to accomplish virtue according to Dharma. So again, we're going to briefly review these because we've looked at them before, but there are four main points that are talked about in this verse. The preliminary one is recognizing, as I said in the meditation, that we have this perfect human existence, this greatly meaningful body of a human body that has the potential to achieve great things with this human existence. And if we look at the other beings we share this world with, all those in the animal states, we see that they lack that. As much as they've got a mind, that mind is not functioning at the level that would allow us to teach them about the Buddha's teachings, to help them to develop their qualities through meditation and so on. They might be able to practice some virtuous things, but essentially they're blocked to being able to engage in the teachings at the level that we can in our human life. So with that preliminary thought, we have one, the reality that it easily perishes, that death will come, and that at the end of death, due to our karma, we may be propelled into one of these lower states. We may end up in an animal existence. So we have to be attentive to assuring that we create the causes that will be opposed to that. Those two causes are the third topic, refuge. We need to have refuge in the three jewels, the three rare sublime ones, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, meaning that we see them as a source of our protection. We see that following the Buddha's teachings will help us to avert that suffering. And then we practice abiding by the law of karma, abandoning those negative deeds, accomplishing virtue. So again, I won't go through a detailed explanation, but this is the very first level of our stages of the path, is to recognize that our own destiny is in our hands. Your next existence isn't doled out by some supreme being. It's the product of your own mind, your own actions, and you have to be attentive to those then. Again, Buddhism doesn't teach this whole concept of karma from a moralistic point of view. It's simply a cause and effect point of view. It's scientific. You gain certain effects from certain causes. And so we have to be very meticulous in following that law of cause and effect. That's the first level of the stages of the path. But as I pointed out when we went through this, cause and effect play a role in all the rest of the teachings as well. The whole Buddha's path is based on the concept of cause and effect. If you want certain effects, you have to create the causes for them. They don't magically appear. We know this in our physical world, but we don't see it in our world of our own experience and the experiences of sentient beings. So let's go on to the next verse, which is the second level of the stages of the path, the graduated path of the middle capable being, as Rinpoche calls these. So let's go ahead and read that now. In dependence upon that, even if I achieve the mere higher rebirth of a deva or a human, I will still have to experience suffering endlessly in samsara because of not having abandoned and being under the control of the disturbing thought obscurations. Therefore, please bless me to reflect well upon the way of circling in samsara and to continuously follow day and night the path of the three types of precious trainings, the principal method for becoming free from samsara. So this speaks to, again, the bigger picture, and it's still focused on your own situation, just as in the first level, you were looking at your own rebirth. Here you're looking at your own circling in existence, what we call samsara, that you have been in this process since beginningless time because there's no beginning to the mind, and you will continue to go through this process if you don't address the causes of it. Once more, based on cause and effect, the causes of us circling from life to life are in our own minds. It's our own delusions. It's called here the disturbing thought obscurations. This is sometimes what Rinpoche calls these. These are rooted in our ignorance, our not knowing the nature of reality correctly, and moreover, holding reality to be different than it is, to be contrary than what it is. And so we are adhering to that, and on the basis of that, we create all these other disturbing thoughts. We create karma. That karma keeps us bound up in existence, going from life to life, having all the varieties of experiences. Karma is behind everything, but we have to break through those causes in regard to what's causing our suffering at the deepest level. What is causing us to go from life to life? So we went through the three higher trainings that are involved in addressing this, that are at the very end of this verse. They are essentially having a foundation of training in good morality, which we already talked about in the previous verse. but then on the basis of good morality, being able to develop deep concentration. The Buddhist path is one of meditation, of developing deep concentration. Then when one has that concentration, you build upon that the third training, which is a training in wisdom. The wisdom that knows how things actually exist, that undermines the ignorance that is driving the whole show. So if you're curious, if you're new to Buddhism and in the room and want to study this more, we are going to be doing the Discovering Buddhism module on samsara and nirvana in the new year. I think it's going to start the second Saturday of January. So if you want to explore the main teaching of Buddhism, which is called the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, that kind of is the Buddha's way of explaining these two realities of samsara and nirvana. Samsara, what we are currently involved in, nirvana, the peace we can attain when we're liberated from the causes of suffering. So this is the second level of the stages of the path. Up to this point, as I said, we've been mostly concerned about ourselves. The verse we went through last time is the one on the top of page 9 there. This is the common graduated path of the great capable being, the one who aspires to be a benefit to all sentient beings. Let's read that together. In dependence upon that, even if I achieve mere liberation, since there is no sentient being of the 6 types who has not been my father and mother, please bless me to think I must fulfill their purpose and turn away from the lower happiness of nirvana. Then please bless me to generate precious bodhicitta by equalizing and exchanging myself with others, and to follow the conduct of the conqueror's sons, the 6 paramitas, and so forth. So this verse is about bodhicitta, which again we meditated on before the class. This is the highest motivation we can have in the stages of the path. And it's built to begin on the basis of the fact that all these beings, whatever of the 6 realms they've been in, of the 3 lower realms, the 3 higher realms, whatever existence they've had, and wherever they are now, they've all been your kind father and mother. You know, they've all taken care of you to that degree, been very intimately involved in your care. And this is based on the fact that, again, there's no beginning to our rebirth. So every time we've been born from a womb or an egg, we've needed a mother. We needed someone to play that role for us. We've needed a father to play that role as well. And we've needed, of course, all the other beings. We can think about them in regard to any kind being that we've experienced in our life. But the kindness of a mother is particularly relevant when we think about this human life. You know, when we're born human, we're extremely vulnerable. We can't take care of ourselves at all. If our parents had left us there and not tended to us in the way that certainly most of you had a mother to do, we would not be here today. So we've all made it to this point based on the kindness of our fathers and mothers, these kind sentient beings who've done this in this life as well as in all the lifetimes that we've had. So on that understanding, and because we understand their suffering, because we've done the previous analyses in regard to ourselves, we can generate deep compassion for them. We can see that their situation is just like ours, no different. And they too want to achieve true peace, true happiness. So to be solely dedicated to our own welfare, as we've done so far in the stages of the path, would be very selfish, would be very not so thoughtful in regard to the situation that these kind beings are in. So it says there, then please bless me to think I must fulfill their purpose and turn away from the lower happiness of nirvana. Now again, this doesn't mean that you won't achieve your own nirvana, that you won't achieve a good rebirth. It means all that other happiness will come by the way when you have your eye on the biggest goal, the greatest goal, which is to achieve Buddhahood, to achieve enlightenment, to actually become a Buddha for the sake of others. You know, to go beyond just these lesser goals that are, again, not as relevant because all sentient beings are in the same situation as ourselves. So again, we went through the techniques briefly last time to do that. One of them is this technique of equalizing and exchanging myself with others, which is in that, towards the end of that verse. This is where we try to overcome one of the main obstacles to that mind of bodhicitta, which is the mind of self-centeredness, self-cherishing. All of us have it to some degree, some greater than others, but most of us are living our day with this thought of me, myself, and I guiding all of our actions, what I need, what I want. And sometimes we even harm others in the space of getting those things for ourselves. But certainly this mind isn't as aware or attentive to the needs of others. So we have to replace the mind that cherishes self with the mind that cherishes others. So we're going to be hearing more about this whole concept. I'm not going to go into it in great detail with this verse because we went through that last week. But in the verses that come after this, when we get into the next page towards the bottom, as well as these verses from Master Shantideva's Bodhisattva's Way of Life, all of these are spelling out how we need to cherish others, how we need to put their needs first. Again, and most people, when they start hearing these teachings, they go, well, but what about me? As Lama Zopa says, all the happiness that you seek is guaranteed when you have your mind set on the welfare of others. He says the sun of happiness begins to shine when you cherish others, when we actually put them as the main objective. Then everything we do to meet that fulfills our desires, fulfills our happiness. It helps us karmically to have good rebirths. It helps us to eventually be free from our own suffering. But moreover, it helps us to become fully enlightened, to achieve your potential, which is the state of Buddhahood. Again, I went through this a little bit previously, but all beings have Buddha nature. All beings have a fundamentally pure mind. In Buddhist terms, our minds, this phenomenon that is clear, that knows things, this non-material phenomenon that is consciousness awareness, it is pure in its nature. It's not, even though we've been together with this ignorance since beginningless time as well, even though we've had these disturbing thought obscurations since beginningless time, that's not the nature of our minds. They're like the dirt that's put into water, that when we remove the dirt, the natural purity of the water is revealed. We have that pure mind within us. And that pure mind is the support for us to be able to do this work, to be able to remove all of these once and for all. Not just remove, again, those that are causing our own problems, but to even remove what's keeping us from being able to help others, what are called the obscurations to omniscience, to the omniscient state of Buddhahood. So this mind of bodhicitta is intent upon doing that work on the basis of our having Buddha nature, on the basis of all other beings having Buddha nature. We can then help them too, because they're not lost cases. Even the worst sentient being in this world is not a lost cause, right? They can too develop their minds given the proper conditions and become a Buddha just like we can. So I didn't go into at the very tail end there so much of the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections as they're often translated, of the Bodhisattva. But these are the 6 practices that we're going to go into another course when I finish this text, which will hopefully be within the next month or so. Then I will go forward and do a little course on the 6 paramitas. These are the 6 practices of generosity, which is said to be the easiest to practice of these. Morality, which we've talked about a little bit, but we'll go into that in more detail in that course. Patience. Patience is a big practice that we need to be engaged in our world in particular. Then we have joyful effort or enthusiasm, this perseverance we bring to our path that helps us to create great stores of positive energy and move along the path. And then 5th one is concentration, which we've touched on a little bit with the higher trainings. And the 6th one is wisdom, which was also part of the higher trainings. But in the context of the Bodhisattva's path, you're doing these as a means to accomplish Buddhahood. You're doing them with bodhicitta, with this mind that is intent upon that highest goal. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions before I continue. It didn't take too long to go through what we've done so far. Any questions on this? Is there anything from anyone who's at home? Okay. All right, so let's go forward then and read this final verse of the Stages of the Path text, this sort of glance meditation on the stages. This is where we get to the graduated path of the secret mantra Vajra vehicle of the greatest capable being. This is the unique teachings that pertain to Tantra. And I'll explain all of this terminology when we finish this verse. So let's read that together. Having trained my mind in the common path in that way, I will not be upset, even if I have to experience the sufferings of samsara for a long time. However, please bless me to look at sentient beings with extraordinary, unbearable compassion, and to enter the quick path of the Vajrayana teachings. Then please bless me to protect my vows and samayas more than my life, and to quickly accomplish the unified Vajradhara state in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. Okay, so within the Mahayana, within this body of teachings that we call the Mahayana, which is what we've been focusing on in terms of that previous verse, generating that motivation of bodhicitta, this is what bodhisattvas do. Bodhisattvas are practitioners of the Mahayana, the universal vehicle, the beings that are intent upon helping all sentient beings. A subset of those teachings are what are called the tantric teachings. The Buddha himself is said to have given the tantric teachings. The tantric teachings were for those unique bodhisattvas who had this determination to help others as quickly as possible. This is the motivation that we're looking at in these first few lines. Even though we've understood all this and that we want to be intent on the welfare of others, we may think, well, then I will endure the sufferings of samsara as long as it takes for me to become a Buddha to be able to help others. But you may have a second thought, which is this third line there where it says to bless you to be able to look at sentient beings with extraordinary, unbearable compassion. So while you yourself may have the determination to take however long it takes to become a Buddha, while you're taking however long it takes, sentient beings are suffering. Sentient beings are continuing to be plagued by all of the things we've talked about earlier that were part of our own suffering. Going from life to life, experiencing the sufferings of the lower realms, experiencing even the sufferings of the upper realms of the human life and so on, never finding any real satisfaction. All these kind mother sentient beings are just perpetuating their own suffering while we're unenlightened. So the motivation of someone who practices Tantra has to be really, really strong compassion. What's called here again, this unbearable compassion, where you find it unbearable that other sentient beings are suffering because you're not qualified yet to lead them out of that. You need to become a Buddha in order to do that fully. I mean, we can help others to some extent. And don't get me wrong. In this human life, we can do a lot to help others, but most of the help we can give them is really just temporal. And we can begin to help them in a more ultimate way by giving them the Dharma, giving them teachings that will help them to see their situation in the light of what the Buddha taught, and then practice accordingly. But to be really helpful to the degree that you want to be, to know their minds fully, you need an omniscient mind yourself. To know their karma fully, you need that as well. In order to understand exactly what advice needs to be given to every being, you have to become a Buddha. And in order for their suffering to be alleviated more quickly, you need to become a Buddha more quickly. So the motivation of someone entering Tantra is ideally this unbearable compassion. It breaks your heart to see that any single sentient being is continuing to suffer because you're not able to help them fully yet. So this is the concept behind the tantric path. Tantra is not taught in all the Buddhist traditions. My understanding is that other than Tibetan Buddhism, there's only one small branch of Japanese Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, that teaches Tantra. It is, again, a unique corpus of teachings that came, they say, during the Buddha's lifetime, he taught some of this in this rare form of Vajradhara, which was mentioned in the last line there. He kind of emanated in a unique form to various beings and taught them this tantric path. But he also is said to have taught it at other times when he had already, exited from this world in a physical form, but would appear and teach various bodhisattva disciples this path. The tantric path is a complex one. I'm not about to go into the detail involved in it. Some of you in the room have taken some tantric initiations or empowerments. When you feel that you've studied the sutra presentation, which is most of what we looked at prior to this, when you've really understood the sutra presentation, then at that point, perhaps you might be ready to enter into the tantric teachings. But the tantric teachings do involve entering into the path through empowerment. And an empowerment or an initiation is done with a qualified master. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he was here a few years back, did do some tantric empowerments, especially the one over the weekend was a full empowerment into medicine Buddha. It was one of the lower tantras, but a very powerful practice to be initiated into. So when you receive initiation, then you begin to practice the tantric method for becoming enlightened, which is unique because it works with this concept that we call it deity yoga. It's basically Buddha yoga. It's your visualizing yourself in the form of a Buddha now. It's called the resultant path because it's taking your future Buddhahood and trying to be in the present with that, which is a kind of outrageous in some ways, when you think about it, because of course we're not Buddhas yet, we're not qualified yet, but we're trying to hold that perfect view of ourselves as Buddhas. So I'm not going to go into huge detail again about what Tantra all involves. There are teachings available certainly when you enter into that, but it's not something that we will want to talk about a whole lot. But this is the primary method. It's a meditation where you try to see yourself in the form of a Buddha now, rather than waiting to develop all the causes for it and it's off sometime in the future. I want to think of myself as a Buddha now. I want to think of all other beings as a Buddha now. I want to think of this as a pure land, a pure realm that is the product of my own purification of my mind. So Tantra is a very powerful path. It's said that if you practice Tantra, you can achieve enlightenment. If you have all the prerequisites, everything in line, you can achieve enlightenment in as short a time as 3 years, 3 months of this human life. Now, to have all of that in place, to be able to practice that way, might not be the situation for every one of us. But nonetheless, it's good to aspire to practice the tantric path. This is what this verse is about, is that having trained our own minds in the common path, the sutra path, and the way that we talked about, please, bless me to be able to develop this extraordinary compassion to enter into the tantric path through gaining empowerment, what's called sometimes Vajrayana, sometimes Tantra, sometimes Mantra. There's lots of different names for it. But the idea is that we want to enter into that. And then once we have entered into that, protect any vows we gain through that, which are only given when you have the higher tantras. The one again that Rinpoche did was one of the lower tantras. When you enter into the higher tantric practices, trying to say all my R words there, tantric practices. When you do that, you then have vows that you have to keep. And those vows will help you on your path, just like all the vows that are set up in Buddhism are to help you to narrowly define the path that you're on and make sure that you uphold the practices that get you there. So essentially, when you take those vows and you have samayas, which are commitments that you make to your gurus around the various practices that you're doing, when you do all of that, you need to take those very seriously. It means you need to uphold those. That's why, again, Tantra isn't something that just people walking in the door would be encouraged to practice, to enter into that unique path. We want to have good foundation before we enter into that. Already have taken the other 2 sets of vows, which are the lay vows, of the pratimoksha, the individual liberation vows, the bodhisattva vows, which are the Mahayana motivation to be able to benefit others, enacted into vows that help us to maintain that behavior. So you want to have some previous experience with things before you enter into Tantra, but once you have done so, as it says there, please bless me to protect my vows and samayas, my commitments, more than my life. That sounds pretty heavy duty, right? We went through this yesterday when we were in a refuge class. We were talking about not giving up refuge at the cost of your life. Well, most of us aren't going to have to, give up our lives or our vows or our practice of Buddhism. That probably is not going to be the case in this lifetime, hopefully. But nonetheless, we have to have that strength of determination that we're going to practice the tantric path purely. And then finally, it says there, to quickly accomplish the unified Vajradhara state, which again is the state of complete Buddhahood, in one brief lifetime of this degenerate age, this degenerate time that we're in. Tantra is said to be very powerful in what's called this degenerate time. They say there are 5 degenerations. The most important one to focus on is what's called degeneration of the afflictions, that there's a lot of afflictions, a lot of anger, a lot of attachment, a lot of these things going on. In tantric path, we use the energy of those delusions. We don't use the delusions themselves. The delusions lead down a wrong pathway, but there's an energy behind those that can be harnessed and used. Again, that's kind of vague to most of you in the room that aren't practicing Tantra, but that's about all I can really say about it. But the idea is when you harness those energies, they become very powerful at helping you to do some deep inner work, these yogas that you engage in the highest Tantra that is available to practice, that allow you to achieve these very subtle states of mind quite quickly. And when you achieve those subtle states of mind, you unite that with all these topics of realization and you become a Buddha even more quickly. As I said, within 3 years, 3 months, you can achieve it in this very life that you currently possess. That's why the human life in the tantric presentation is said to be so important, so valuable, not only because of what we talked about previously, that you have a human intellect and the senses and what have you, especially your mental sense power to be able to investigate the teachings and all of that. But moreover, this human life, this body we possess, has very subtle energies within it. And this is what you're harnessing in Tantra, is working with these subtle energies. And most of you do some form of yoga, or maybe you've done Tai Chi or gone to an acupuncturist. There's no difference in what's being talked about in many of those systems to what we're talking about here in the tantric systems. We use the word wind energy about this, but in yoga, they use prana, right? And then it's qi in your Tibetan, your Chinese medicine and Tai Chi and what have you. Anyway, the idea is that we have these subtle energies in our body and they can be harnessed. They can be used to have these very powerful states of mind. So the tantric teachings are more esoteric, without a doubt. They definitely get into more mystical aspects and what have you. But they were taught by the Buddha for those courageous ones among us who feel that we need to become enlightened much more quickly because others are suffering and we're not yet capable to help them to the degree that we would like to. So are there any questions on the secret mantra, Vajra, vehicle, whatever, all these different names for it? Because I think this might be a good place to break for questions before we continue. Or anything that we've talked about in regard to the path. Yeah, Leah.
So if we realize that we do not have omniscient, we realize this is the general time. We see people suffering, we suffer, and our friends and family suffer. What do you recommend as to help people who are maybe grossly suffering? You know you don't know their mind, and they seek your help.
Right.
Do you have any advice for how do you, if you know?
That's a very tough one, Leah. So for those who are online, the question had to do with, because we don't know the minds of others, because we're not omniscient yet, what help should we give to those who are in fairly disturbed states, who are dealing with great degenerations of their own afflictions, what have you? You know, it's really hard. There's no set answer to that. I think once more, our own ability to apply some wisdom to know what are the, we use this term, skillful means. Again, I always point out our other, the center that's here in Santa Fe, the largest perhaps Buddhist center here in Santa Fe, Upaya Zen Center. This word Upaya means skillful means. Skillful means is what you probably won't have to the greatest degree until you become a Buddha, because it's a real, informed by the two main aspects of the path, our wisdom and our compassion. The compassion that wants to do something to alleviate the suffering of others, but the wisdom that knows how to do that. And so until we have that perfect wisdom, we are going to be thwarted to some degree in knowing exactly what other people might need, having the correct skillful means to be able to benefit them. But that shouldn't be something that stops us. Because even if we make mistakes in our tending to the welfare of others, I think it's okay as long as we keep learning from those mistakes, as long as we keep using that knowledge to deepen our desire to practice better, to apply the teachings better. A lot of people, again, of course, you know, those of us in the room who have some confidence in the Dharma already, which probably most of you, you might want to share these teachings with others because you see that it might alleviate some of their suffering. That the tendency to be quite narrowly focused on one's own welfare, sometimes it's part of the problem, and it's alleviated by these teachings, helping us to be more in touch with others and have more compassion for others and so on. But not everybody's ready for those teachings, right? You may think that, oh, this is a perfect teaching. And there's nothing wrong with offering teachings and with seeing what might be of use in that regard. And if people are open to hearing the teachings and they are, amenable to some of it, then it may definitely benefit. So we should share the Dharma where we can in order to help others with their minds and with what's going on in their lives. In terms of helping them on a more temporal basis with physical things, well, then that's pretty evident. We do what we can there as well to help others, to make sure they get the care, what they might need, especially if they are dealing with quite disturbing minds. But, everyone has their own karma. This is why it's so hard to help, because you can have people who can have very disturbed minds who simply, there's nothing there in the moment that you can get a latch on to be able to help them in any concrete way, because the karma they're dealing with is so strong.
I have a brother-in-law who's suffering greatly. Is it okay to say, I don't know?
I think so. So again, Leah's comment was, is it okay with the case she's talking about, just to tell somebody that I don't know how to help you? I mean, I think it's okay just to, and maybe again, just our presence is help enough, just for them to know that we're there and that we can be called upon if they feel there's something we can help them with. Sometimes that's just good enough, and that may be all that we can give others, is an assurance that we stand with them, that we care about them, that we're praying for them, or whatever the case might be. I think it just involves, again, the skillful means. We don't have it perfected yet, but we have to be skillful in terms of what we do and say to others to help them to feel like they're not alone in it, that they actually do have other people that are concerned about them, that care about them, And that may be good enough, but I don't know. This is one of the Lama Yeshe, in one of the last teachings he gave, which was on bodhicitta. He said, one of the most painful things about our lives is that we can't help others to the degree that we would like to. And I mean, there really is a pain that we experience sometimes with that. When we see somebody who we know is just being tortured in their own stuff, they've created this and we can't help them out of it. We just don't have the ability. So bodhicitta is the answer to that. That's the kind of the second thing I wanted to add on is, sure, act in the moment and do what you can out of whatever skillful means you can garner, but then recognize that this is information that informs your desire to become more capable. That says, this is exactly the reason why I need to practice the path, why I need to deepen my bodhicitta, why I need to engage in the 6 perfections, why I need to engage in the tantric path, why I need to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So we use it as grist for the mill, that everything that we meet informs our motivation to do even deeper work, to get more qualified, but it also doesn't limit us in terms of, we can act sometimes in the moment. But as I said, that may be, depending upon the situation, and it may not be as effective as we would like it to be. But that's, again, more evidence that we need to work on ourselves. Yeah, thank you for that question, Leah. Yeah, Mark, did you have you had your hand up?
Is there a way concerning the tantric practices to just kind of stick your toe in the water?
Yeah, I think there is. Mark's question was, is there a way with Tantra to just put your toe in the water rather than like diving in at the deep end, No, and I wouldn't encourage people to dive in at the deep end. Probably, again, if you have the ability to come to, there will be another module, Discovering Buddhism, we're going to do after that, which is the establishing a daily practice. And the practice we use in there is a practice of Buddha Shakyamuni. They say that, because again, we have all these images of the Buddhas around us, right? And these sort of represent these qualities that each of us have in ourselves that we can ripen to that degree. So Medicine Buddha, who's over here on the wall, right, the blue Buddha there, that was the initiation that Lama Zopa gave. When you take the initiation, you then can visualize yourself transforming into that figure, seeing yourself as this blue Buddha. All of these, to engage in this, you have to have tantric empowerment, except for one, which is Shakyamuni Buddha, the gold Buddha, and the tanka behind me, the statue behind me. So you can practice that. And that's the practice we use in that module, where you visualize yourself arising in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni without any tantric empowerment. It doesn't require that. You don't have to go to find a Lama to give you that empowerment. You don't have to go through all of that, take any additional vows. You just simply practice that. So you can either pick up that practice your own and start working with it, or if you'd like instruction, again, I'll be going through that on the Saturdays in March and April, I believe, is when we're going to get to that module. And we can go, you can have some more instruction on how to work with that. So that's one way to kind of put your toe in the water and get a feeling for what it's like to engage in some of the tantric practices. But most of the more involved tantric practices, you can't really learn until you go further down the path. Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, I did distribute or mention, and I can certainly distribute more copies of it, that 9-round breathing meditation. Were you here that very first class of this? Because Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he gives us the instruction before we engage in this to start with some calming meditation. And he advises what's called the 9-round breathing meditation, which I'm not going to go into all the details of, but it involves visualizing 3 channels. Which is the essence of the tantric practice, is these 3 channels, the left and the right channels, as well as the central channel. And these sort of straw tubes that the energy travels down, that we want to visualize clearing when we're doing this breathing exercise of 3 rounds of 3 breaths each. So again, I have the instructions for those. Maybe I'll run upstairs and make some copies during the break for anybody who would like that. That's another way to get a taste of what Tantra's like, to work with some of this. There's also another practice that's in How to Meditate that Kathleen McDonald wrote, that's about, I can't remember, they use the inner heat meditation is what it's called in there. There's this, it's called Tummo, and Tummo is practiced, again, at a really high level of Tantra, but Lama Yeshe was really keen on beginners being able to work with this, and you can read through that. Be careful with it. It's just like when people practice Kundalini yoga, you can start stirring up some energies when you're doing things if you're not being really careful. So again, just be careful in doing that practice, but it is one way to taste the chocolate, as Lama Yeshe used to call it, to begin to have some idea of what it's like. It essentially involves this breathing where you tighten up the lower part of the stomach and bring it upward somewhat like the diaphragm, and then you breathe down into it. So you create these two pressure points, breathing down while you're holding up, and it creates a bit of an heat in the center of your navel area right here. It's kind of interesting. So, yes, space. I'm sorry, Rita. I'm always doing that. Not always. So I sometimes do that. I apologize again.
It's Lama Yeshe's introduction to Tantra as even foundation for
Absolutely.
deciding what you want to do to dip your feet in the water. I just found it's just such an emotionally accessible book, I found.
Yeah.
I think we might have copies of it.
It-
Lama Yeshe's introduction to Tantra.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Thanks, Rita. Yeah, what Rita shared was that Lama Yeshe's book is also a really good way to get an introduction to Tantra through that title, Introduction to Tantra. It gives kind of a really nice, tasty view of it without having to, again, do any empowerment, and does give you kind of how Sutra informs it as well. It's a really, really useful book. We use that when we get to the module of Discovering Buddhism on Tantra. I imagine that'll be much later this year. That's like the last module of Discovering Buddhism. But any other comments on what we talked about then today so far? These three levels, or yeah, Judith?
I just recently experienced, and I didn't know how to label it, but now I do. But working with small children and having someone in the room who's supposed to be a teacher, scaring the other adults and the kids. And what I realized was I was one of
The perfections. Okay. So June's question was, she said she knows that we're going to do the course on the 6 perfections, but exactly what type of patience are we talking about in regard to the perfection of patience? They usually talk about patience in terms of its essential nature is having an undisturbed mind. So there has to be something that would normally disturb your mind, and you're maintaining an undisturbed mind in the face of it. The 3 things that they usually talk about as objects of our patience are the harm that others are inflicting upon us by what they're saying, doing, their political views, whatever. This usually involves others. The other type of thing we have to be patient with are just the general sufferings of samsara. People get very impatient with their illness or with their aging or with whatever the case might be. And then the third one is even with the practice of the Dharma, which can be very difficult at times, especially the teachings on emptiness and what have you. We have to have a patience in being able to be with not understanding fully, with being, critical of ourselves, whatever. We need to have an undisturbed mind in that regard. So those are the main things that we'll be talking about when we go through patience. But any other comments or questions? Thanks, June. Okay. Let's go forward then to the top of page 10. And Rinpoche does say in his commentary on this that these 2 verses are not part of the prayer that we just went through. The prayer that we just went through ends with the entering Tantra and accomplishing the Vajradhara state and so on. That's this prayer by Dorji Chang Losang Jimpa. These 2 verses, actually, you might recognize these because we do use them sometimes in the Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga, and I'm not sure where I've seen this other one, but it's a dedication kind of prayer. But let's read those 2 verses that are at the top of page 10. May I not give rise to heresy for even a second in regard to the actions of the glorious Guru. May I see whatever actions are done as pure. With this devotion, may I receive the Guru's blessings in my heart. Magnificent and precious root Guru, please abide on the lotus seat at my heart. Guide me with your great kindness and grant me the realizations of your holy body, speech, and mind. So that first verse is once more touching on what we had seen earlier of trying to maintain a focus on the positive aspects, the positive qualities of our gurus, not to be kind of consumed with things that we see that we might think of as faults, but to be really upholding as much as we can the pure view. Now, remember when I talked about this way back several sessions ago, this doesn't mean that we become really naive and simplistic in looking at things and don't discern what is proper and improper. Certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, as well as other branches of Buddhism, as well as other spiritual traditions around the world, there have been abuses of power by people who are in a lama or guru or teacher or reverend or minister or whatever position. So there are people who will abuse that, and we have to be attentive to that. So this doesn't mean that we become kind of just subject to doing whatever anybody says. That's not what following a guru means, or seeing a guru as pure means. And there was that article, again, I'm happy to provide a copy of it or links to it, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that you can find online, where he talks about how this is to be interpreted. It's called Questioning the Advice of the Guru. And it comes from one of the published books that many years ago on the stages of the path, where he talks about guru devotion, what this means in Tibetan Buddhism. But he essentially says it doesn't mean that you close an eye to anything that you see that is potentially disturbing. There have been incidents like that, again, that we need to be attentive to, and not just gloss over in some way and thinking, oh, it's the guru, everything they do is pure. Well, that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to help you, as I said earlier, to focus on what is positive and really embrace the positive qualities of your teachers, of those who are in that special role as your gurus, as your lamas. Okay, so this is the idea behind this, is to try to hold that type of devotion towards your teacher as much as possible. Even if you separate from them, even if something they do does disturb your mind to where you don't want to be in their presence, you still hold them in a very dear light on the basis of what you did learn from them. I mentioned this previously. One of my very first Tibetan Buddhist teacher was Sogyal Rinpoche, who many of you know was also accused of doing improper things in terms of his behavior with his students. I never had that experience with him. He benefited my mind greatly. I'm very happy that Sogyal Rinpoche was one of my teachers. And I wasn't with his organization that long even, to be aware of so much of what was going on. So, but nonetheless, I can still hold, even though if those things are true, the things that happened, the people who made those allegations, which I have no reason to suspect that they were not true, I can still hold Sogyal Rinpoche in terms of what he did for me and the teachings that I got from him as a very important part of my spiritual life. And there's no problem then. You just hold on to what it is that is really positive about it. Poor Mani. Okay, so then the second part, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that the second part, where you're kind of having the guru enter into your heart, there is a unique way that this is taught in Highest Yoga Tantra, but we won't go into that obviously, because that's for those who have that practice. But you can simply, in this part of the practice, you can visualize that the Buddha comes to the crown of your head, or however it is that you're visualizing in this. If you wanted to have a visualization of the Buddha throughout this, you could. But that Buddha is the same essence as your guru. And you think that the guru sort of dissolves into light, and this light just comes and it purifies and blesses your body, which is through the crown, your speech, which is through the throat chakra, and then your heart, which is the mind of we say that your very subtlemost mind is placed in this point of your body, in the heart chakra area. So essentially you can see it blessing the body, speech, and mind, kind of giving you the same qualities as the Buddhas. So you can do that without any problem. That doesn't require any tantric empowerment either. Just to feel this sort of wave of blessing that kind of goes through your whole being and blesses all three of these doors of body, speech, and mind. And then it says, yeah, please abide on the lotus seat at my heart. If you want to visualize then the Buddha arising, or Lama Tsongkhapa, or whoever it is you're working with as embodying your gurus, then you can think about them being at the center of your heart. And you're walking around all day with the Buddha at your heart. How wonderful. Can feel the support, the guidance of the Buddha at those times. So that's probably all I need to say about these. I don't know, let me look at Rinpoche's commentary to see if I'm missing anything on this. But he also says, in our daily interactions with our gurus, if you do have the opportunity to, interact with your gurus on a somewhat regular basis, if the guru is speaking to you, he says, and speaking very sweetly and praising you, think all the Buddhas are praising me. If the guru is scolding you, then think this is the action of all the Buddhas. Whatever it is that the gurus are doing, try to hold that as the pure view of this being the Buddhas, how they're manifesting in your life. All right, so that's the end of this whole Lam Rim kind of part of this text, to this daily practice. What we do, as I mentioned from here, is we begin to work with some verses, these amazing verses that are drawn from Geshe Langri Tangpa, from Arya Sura, and from Shantideva, that are all about helping us to remember how we need to be of service to others, how we need to be a benefit to others, on the basis of certainly seeing them, as we do in this very first verse, as being essential to accomplishing our own welfare, that they are very precious for us, and therefore we have to become somewhat precious to them. We want to take care of them. So any, again, questions up to this point before I move forward? All right, so then it says, Rinpoche's little advice here is recite the following verses on how to live your life for sentient beings. Let's read the very first one, and many of you will recognize this verse. It's from a text that is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's favorite text. He teaches on it frequently. If he has like a single session, a single day, he often takes this text because it's quite short, 8 verses. And those 8 verses help you to get a grip on this whole idea of what we call Lojong, thought transformation. That's why it's called the 8 verses of thought transformation. Let's read that verse together. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. That's kind of interesting. This is Rinpoche's translation of the Tibetan. And there are some that actually have this determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit for all sentient beings. It's kind of strange that he worded it from, but he's using this verse as a way for us to see how all of our happiness comes from other sentient beings. How the happiness we have in our daily life, again, is arising on the basis of the karma we created. And that karma we created was in regard to other sentient beings. We're going to talk about generosity as the first of the 6 perfections, but the karma of generosity is that by your giving your resources, your protection, your dharma, whatever it is that you can to others, you create the causes to receive. So can you practice generosity without other sentient beings? Good luck. I mean, you can offer to, the altar or whatever, those practices that we sometimes do, but, we're thinking about the Buddhas there as being a support for that. They are beings as well. But you need especially other sentient beings in this world, the beings who are inhabiting this world, as a support for your practice of morality, for your practice of generosity, for your practice of patience. We need the irritating people in our lives to practice patience, right? Otherwise, good luck. How are we ever going to get patient? If everyone's all smiley face every time we see them, well, there's never going to be an opportunity to practice patience. So we need other sentient beings to get even the temporal happiness we have karmically. Even to practice, some of the foundational stuff that gets us to liberation, you require other sentient beings, even though it is an individual accomplishment. And certainly to accomplish enlightenment, you need other sentient beings, right? Because they're the support of bodhicitta. You can't sit there and think, I'm going to become enlightened for the sake of nobody. Then it becomes self-centered again. I'm going to become enlightened for the sake of all these beings. Because all these beings have been so kind to me, and therefore I need to be reciprocal. I need to actually take care of them to an even greater degree. So there is, once more, a reliance upon other sentient beings. So in a way, we can say we are determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all of those sentient beings by using them as a support for our development of enlightenment, for our ability to be able to help them. So it's never becomes selfish. It never becomes, oh, I want all of it from all of you. Give it to me now. It becomes, I want to be able to get the greatest benefit from all of you and use my opportunity I have with all sentient beings to the greatest advantage. The greatest advantage is to help me to become enlightened, to help them then. Otherwise, I can help them once more to some degree, but I'm not going to be very skillful at helping them. I'm not going to be complete in my aid to others. In that way, we see that they are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. So I'm going to read a little bit of what Rinpoche shares on this, because I think it's really quite nice. He says, among material objects, gold, diamonds, and sapphires are rare and precious, but even more rare and precious is a wish-granting jewel. Those who have the necessary merit can pray to a wish-granting jewel for any external temporary comfort of this life, such as cars, houses, and swimming pools. This is a mythical thing, obviously. I don't know, there probably are worlds where this exists, but in our world, I haven't seen one yet. But it's like the genie in the bottle or something. It's like, okay, I want this, I want that. And you can get all these material things, right? How wonderful you could have that in this world. But with a wish-granting jewel alone, he says, you can't purify the negative karma that is the cause of the lower realms, and you can't practice the morality of not harming others. So it can't bring you a higher rebirth, right? The wish-granting jewel isn't going to bring you a higher rebirth. With a wish-granting jewel, you can't practice the 3 higher trainings, and so you can't achieve the ultimate happiness of liberation from samsara. Nor can you practice bodhicitta with it. So you can't achieve full enlightenment, Buddhahood, even if you own the whole sky filled with wish-granting jewels, he says. They can't give you enlightenment, right? And you can't wish for enlightenment. Please make me a Buddha. It doesn't work that way. It's just the limitations are there. It's only incapable of producing something of temporary benefit that's physical in this world. But, he says, just one sentient being can give you enlightenment if you generate compassion and bodhicitta for them and actualize the path. Since cherishing one sentient being gives you enlightenment, even one sentient being is priceless. Besides a person, even a tiny insect such as an ant or a mosquito is priceless. The value of the whole sky filled with wish-granting jewels is nothing compared to the value of one sentient being. Cherishing even one sentient being opens the door to all your happiness. Now again, start with one sentient being. That's a good place to start, right? Mani. Mary can cherish Mani. One sentient being that's in our lives, be it a child, a parent, a pet, a friend, a neighbor, whatever, and make them something that you cherish. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to go out of your way to do all sorts of extraordinary things for them. Cherish them in your heart. Try to hold them as being that dear, because it is due to every single being that you encounter that exists in this world that you will become enlightened. You cannot become enlightened without all those sentient beings. Now, again, I don't have to know all sentient beings to generate bodhicitta, but I have to have a mind that doesn't exclude a single one of them. That doesn't exclude, he who shall not be named. That doesn't exclude, anyone in our lives who we find, difficulties with, problems with, right? We have to have that mind that is equally concerned and equal regard. Remember, we talked last week about the foundation being equanimity and equal regard for all beings. Because we see that the roles they're playing in this life are just like a theater production. They're coming into this life as the bad guy, and they're coming into this life as the good person, and this life as the, whatever. All of it is just playing out in this life on the basis of karma and conditions. And then they die and they go on to another role. In that role, they manifest in a different way and what have you. It's an ever-changing stage with all sorts of beings floating in and out of it. It would be ridiculous for us to hold somebody as being an absolute. There's no absolute. Adolf Hitler wasn't an absolute horrible person forever and all time. He was a person just like us, struggling with his mind, and just went down some wrong pathways and ended up with a pretty, horrific track record for that lifetime, right? Did some horrible things for which the mind of Adolf Hitler is suffering and going into, other existences on the basis of the behavior in this life. There's nothing absolute about any of this. So Rinpoche goes on to talk about even the person who complains about you, abuses you, cheats you, or blames you is a wish-granting jewel. This person you call enemy also gives you higher rebirth, liberation, and full enlightenment. If you cherish and generate compassion for this enemy, you get everything, all happiness from them. But if you don't cherish this enemy, if you don't have compassion for them and instead renounce them, you won't generate bodhicitta and all the other realizations. So there's no enlightenment for you. Please make sure you understand this, he says. Every being is precious to us when we have this mind of bodhicitta, because this mind of bodhicitta relies upon every being as a support for that. You want to take every being to enlightenment, regardless of their track record, regardless of what they did in this life and any other life, because you see them as, one, having Buddha nature, and two, being obscured to that by virtue of all the garbage in their own minds, all the disturbing thought obscurations that we saw earlier in that one verse. So the other aspect too is that we wouldn't even want to harm those beings. Why? Because they're the object of the bodhicitta of all the bodhisattvas that exist right now. I mean, they are cherished in the same way that we are cherished. Why would we discriminate then and think they're worthy of harm and we will help other people, but we're going to harm them? Everything we do should be in alignment with this concept that every being is more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. This is a good meditation to do. In this verse, one single verse from this, 8 verses, you could meditate on a long, long time. And the resultant that you want to get to is, as it says there, when we see them in that way, we will hold them most dear at all times. Now, does that mean, again, that I have to become their best buddy and hang out with them and spend time with them and do all sorts of things for them? No, you have to just hold them in your heart. And yeah, if it's possible to do nice things for them in this life, do that. But the most important thing is that you pray for them, that you hold them in your heart, that you're concerned about them, that you want to become enlightened for them. Remember, I've shared this before, Lama Zopa Rinpoche at the 2017 Light of the Path. They'll be doing Light of the Path retreat again next year in August and September. We'll pump up the excitement on that as we get closer to that event. It's in North Carolina. But in 2017, after the election, at the end of every day when he did the full day's dedications, he would say, "And may bodhicitta grow in the hearts of all Americans, especially Donald Trump." Yeah. And that's a wonderful prayer. I mean, if Donald Trump had bodhicitta in his heart, if he was concerned about the welfare of all beings in this world, his actions would be astounding, right? They would follow from bodhicitta. You don't just have bodhicitta and then behave in a totally opposite way, right? If you have bodhicitta, then you behave in a way that is complementary to that, a way that is driven by compassion for beings. And he's obviously got a lot of charisma, right? He'd be a wonderful bodhisattva in that regard, because a lot of people find him very attractive, find him very, there's something there, right? So pray for him to develop bodhicitta. Pray for him to be, kind of have this shift of mind, shift of heart. This is a very powerful prayer, right? So that's the idea behind that first verse. What I do, I mentioned that when I do this morning practice, I sometimes insert additional prayers. And this is where I actually do the whole recitation of the 8 verses, because I think it's useful for me to remind myself of those 8 verses. Let me point out where they are. You don't have to, I could certainly make a copy of the sheet that I have, but you all have a prayer book there, right? You can go in the prayer book to the daily meditation practice. No, I'm sorry. It's in the Ever-Flowing Nectar practice. It's either going to be around page 161 or somewhere in that neighborhood. I've got it on 161, but again, there are 2 different versions of the prayer book. So you're in a practice that's called, up at the top, it'll say Ever-Flowing Nectar. And you're looking for the actual practice where that has these verses. Is it on another page in some of your prayer books? 161, okay. So you'll see there's the first one that we just read. This is the very first verse, determined to obtain, and so on. The next one, maybe we'll just, go through each of these and just read them really briefly. And you certainly, again, are welcome to augment your recitation of what Rinpoche has with the full 8 verses. Let's read the next one there. When in the company of others, I shall always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme. So this is about a practice of genuine humility, about us not having that egocentric mindset whenever we're with other people, like it's all about us and we're most important in the room, and seeing others through the lens of what are they doing for you. As C.S. Lewis says, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. Diminishing that self-importance that we put on ourselves, and to try to have this mind that holds others dear and supreme from the depths of our heart, that wherever we are at, we feel like it's our job to kind of serve the needs of others, to be there. And it doesn't, again, it can manifest in physical things that you're doing, but it's mostly a mindset we're talking about. This is mind training, thought transformation. All right, let's go on to the third one. Vigilant, the moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. This is our basic practice. Training to subdue our minds, to be attentive to when we see something even beginning to arise that is harmful to our minds and harmful to others frequently, usually as well. We want to address it immediately. There's that wonderful phrase from the Kadampa Geshe Ben Kongyo. He says, standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes. Other than this, I have no other job. It's like our job to be ready to have an antidotal mind to anything that arises that's afflictive in nature, whether it be jealousy or greed or anger or desire, whatever, all these things that arise, we have to be ready to antidote them, ready to do what we can to confront and avert them without delay, rather than letting them take root in our minds, set up shop, begin to, pay rent and hang out, you want to kind of kick them out, evict them right away. Don't let them take root. All right, let's go on to the 4th verse. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear, as if I had found a precious treasure. I find having that verse in my morning recitation helps, because you never know who you're going to run into in the course of a day, right? Somebody who's out on the road driving recklessly, or somebody who's in in the store with you who's being really rude or whatever. We do see people who, again, wicked in nature is a bit strong, because it once more doesn't mean that that's their absolute nature. It just means that's how they're appearing at the time, is to have some of that kind of nasty tone to them. And those who are overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering. A lot of people in this world who are in that category, right? Those are the ones we want to hold dear, as if we'd found a precious treasure. Oh, this is someone I can really learn from. Using these techniques of thought transformation. Again, this is pretty high level practice. These are not, baby school kind of stuff. This is where you've got to have been around the Dharma for a while to really strive to practice in this way, to gravitate towards the people that other people are wanting to move away from. What was it, the one thing that Geshe-la shared with you, Judith, about cigarettes that one time, right? Did you want to?
Oh, yeah. I asked him how he could sit next to people. And he said, oh, I even move closer when you're smoking.
Most of us, when we see somebody smoking, we want to move away from it. And Geshe-la was like, oh, I move closer. I mean, it's not that, it's just the whole concept is like, when we see people who are really disturbing to us, what is it like to go up to them and even be with them in some way and say, is there something I can do to help? What's going on for you? To extend ourselves, to want to be with people who normally would be ostracized. Again, not for everybody. I'm not saying don't put yourself in dangerous situations. That's not what this is saying. But recognize that a lot of it is our own mental stuff, right? That we need to kind of keep our mind in check about our judgments of people, our criticisms of people, all the little stories we're telling about people in our own minds that are really not founded in anything. Most people, again, have stories behind why they're in situations that they're in and what have you that, would break our hearts if we heard them. But we don't see that at that time. Instead, we gravitate away from them rather than towards. So the idea here is, to really see them as precious treasures, these people. Let's go on to the 5th. The 5th and the 6th continue this idea of working with difficult people or situations. When out of envy others mistreats me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. So being mistreated out of envy is only one example. You can be mistreated out of a variety of things. But sometimes people are envious of us, and they say things, abuse us with insults. They might even physically abuse us. The idea here is that we're going to accept the defeat and offer the victory to them. I mean, again, once more, if we can feel our egos going, what? You're going to do what? Because that ego side of us is really invested in us being supreme, superior, most important. And we're not about to take the defeat and offer the victory to them. But, so many times we're struggling over that, and it's really irrelevant. Is the victory that important? What's wrong with just saying, oh, yes, you win the argument, no problem, whatever is going on. So this is the idea that even those people who are challenging us in this way, we do need to have that cognizance that we get so invested in what we need, what ourselves need. And oftentimes, once more, this is really not that relevant. But nonetheless, I mean, again, work with each of these verses as best as you can. Understand that they are pretty elevated practices. Being able to look at it and say, even when this person's abusing me, that's fine. What is the abuse doesn't matter in some level, right? I always use that phrase, water off a duck's back, right? Whatever people say to you, it doesn't harm you in any way. I mean, if they physically accost you, well, then maybe it's good to run away. His Holiness says that's the best defense when you're, dealing with somebody who's trying to physically harm you. Run away. What's the problem with running away? Just run away. But, in terms of, allowing them just to do what they need to do and not really being so invested in it again. Let's read the last one. This is the 6th one. This is the 3rd of these 3 that are working with difficult situations. This one is really challenging, I think, for most of us. When someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have great hopes, gives me terrible harm, I shall regard that person as my holy guru. So this is, okay, and the first one, it's those kind of people that we have some distance from already. You know, they're kind of the peripheral people that are doing these nasty things. Then we have other people that are getting involved with us through their envy or other emotions. And now we have somebody who actually, we expect them to love and care for us, right? Because we benefited them greatly. They're the people we've tended to, you know, our children, our parents, or whatever, friends, all these people who we've taken care of. We've gone out of our way to take care of them. And they're doing negative things to us. They're saying things about us, doing things to us that are, coming from that place, giving us terrible harm. Well, that's the ultimate lesson. That's the most holy guru you can encounter, is somebody who's going to push you to that degree of saying, even in the face of people who you've greatly benefited, what happens when they, do something negative? Oh, how wonderful. Thank you. You're giving me an amazing opportunity to diminish my ego, to diminish my self-centeredness, to diminish all of this self-importance. Because why do we get so caught up in everybody who we tend to needing to be so wonderful? Out of attachment, right? That's the mind that's driving us in that way. I take care of you, so you take care of me. This is kind of how society tries. It's quid pro quo. I mentioned that previously, right? I do this for you, so you do it for me. That's the mind of attachment. The mind of love that's genuinely concerned about the other being says, I do this for you unconditionally. Do with it as you wish. It's an act of love from my side because I benefit from that act of love already. I mean, there's no need for you to do something in response to that. But we do in our, relationships, familial and friendship relationships, all of this, we have that expectation that because we've been so good to them, they're going to be good to us. It's pretty unrealistic. It's based on delusion. So these three cases, again, I recite these 8 verses because you never know when you're going to run into these. You never know when that person that is the dearest person in your life decides they're going to be a meanie, that day, or do something, that's not so pleasant. So you have to remember, this is my guru. This is my teacher. This is teaching me something really, really important. Then let's do verse 7, which is about Tonglen. In short, both directly and indirectly do I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So usually they're done in the reverse order. You take away all the suffering and then you give all your happiness. But we're going to talk about Tonglen more in regard to one of the verses from Shantideva, so I won't go into it in as much detail. But this is a very powerful meditation to do, to think that the sufferings that others are experiencing, and the first time I started practicing this, it was in San Francisco with a friend of mine who was dying from AIDS, and I was there at his bedside, and I was trying to do it, and it gave me a real, kind of charge in my heart. I can't say I was that good at it, because sit there and think about taking the suffering of somebody away at that stage in their life, it was really pretty hard to imagine, taking all that on. But then, the other side of it, to kind of give them peace of mind, happiness, whatever it is, all the stuff that you have that brings you happiness transforms into what that person in front of you needs for their happiness. You can practice it on an individual basis. You can practice it with yourself to start with. Think about yourself at an earlier point in your life. Think about yourself right now. Think about yourself in the future, and work with your own sufferings, taking those away, giving peace, giving happiness. You can think about others that are very dear to you first because they're easier to work with, and then begin to expand that circle to work with strangers, to work with eventually difficult people in our lives. But ideally, we want to have this mind for all beings, that we would gladly take away their suffering and we would willingly give our happiness to them. Why? Because that's the essence of compassion and love. That is the true compassion and love. That is great compassion and great love, where we ourselves are willing to do whatever it takes to enact the welfare of others. So Tonglen is mentioned in here because it's one of the key practices in the Lojong, the thought transformation teachings. So really important, as much as you can do that. And even in a day-to-day, our various experiences throughout our day, it's useful to do this. Something negative happens, it's suffering. Say, oh, I have to endure this. May I take this on so others don't have to deal with this? May I have my car accident so other people don't have to have a car accident around the world? May I have a headache so other people don't have to have a headache? it's already a very powerful transformation where it's just not about you. You're going to endure the headache or the car accident or whatever the case is, but you're going to do it with a thought of, may others not have to suffer. You don't even have to think about taking all their headaches on, just work with your own headache. And then when you have something wonderful, delightful in your life, you eat the pizza that's coming, or you have the dessert or whatever, or something delicious and delightful in your life, think of giving that to others. You don't have to go over and give the cake to somebody and say, here, Nancy, here's my cake. Eat the cake, but think that all that pleasure, all that happiness transforms into exactly what they need. May they all have that happiness. Very powerful day-to-day practice, just making all of your actions, whether you're enduring something difficult or something pleasant, into a path to develop love and compassion. Final verse on the page, on mine it's 163, verse 8. Undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So this is the idea that we don't want to get caught up in the worldly concerns behind engaging in these practices once more, that somehow it's feeding all of our desire for fame or good reputation, for material gain, for the happiness that is fleeting of this life. All these things we get attached to, and we have an aversion to the opposite of them. These are these 8 worldly concerns, 4 that we're attracted to, 4 that we're attracted to not be with. These attachments guide so much of our life. We like to have the comfortable situations, have the pleasant things going on in our lives, have material gain and what have you, to have fame, to have a good reputation in the world, to not be criticized, to be praised. Everyone loves praise, right? So we have the avoidance of the opposite of those. No one wants to lose. No one wants, any material loss going on in their lives. No one wants to, have uncomfortable situations. No one wants the middle seat on the plane, right? I always point that out, I mean, you'll sit in it if you're traveling with two or three people, right? Because then you're kind of with people that you're traveling with. But I've never reserved the middle seat in advance when I'm traveling alone, right? So we are strongly attracted to what's comfortable, and we really are attracted to avoiding what's uncomfortable. So these are what's driving most of our lives. These are the 8 worldly concerns. So free of the stains of those, of being guided by those, may we be able to see the truth of reality, see all phenomena as illusory, see the emptiness of those phenomena, which we discussed a few weeks ago, and then finally be released from the bondage of attachment. Attain the state not just of our own liberation, but of complete enlightenment for the sake of others. That's a really brief commentary on that. Know that His Holiness, as I said, it's one of his favorite texts, so there are many published commentaries that he's given on that. And there's even a little book by Geshe Sonam Rinchen on those. But it's a very powerful way to make just that one verse into a larger meditation on how we have to relate to others throughout our day, how we have to use whatever we meet to practice Tonglen and so on. Any questions or comments on that? Yeah, Mark.
Okay, so I'm driving down the road and someone rear ends me. Right?
Okay.
Likely, but
Mm-hmm.
and I feel my ego goes wah.
Right.
And I'm angry, and I think about I meditate on that. And I do gain some understanding that this was somewhat based in fear.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not dealing with that as my guru.
Right.
So could you say exactly what steps to take?
So Mark's question for those online is that if he's driving down the road and somebody rear ends him, and not a major accident or something, but you can see that in a habitual way, anger arises and you get upset at the person for what they did and da-da-da-da. Well, how do we step by step practice this type of teaching in a scenario like that? Well, again, you're still going to have to deal with the reality of the accident. So that's not to say that we don't just, if you're feeling really magnanimous and generous, maybe you just say, oh, don't worry about it. No big deal, and you drive on your way and you don't do anything. That we have to also think about the other person though, too. If this is somebody who we can tell perhaps is a pretty reckless driver and isn't really paying attention to things, it might be good for them to learn a little bit more about how to be more conscientious in their driving and so on. So maybe there's some usefulness that we could see from their side to helping them to see that. But mostly we want to look at it from the point of view of how do we keep these states of mind that are problematic arising? How do you keep anger from arising? Because if we confront the situation or work with the situation with a mind of anger, it's not going to go well, generally. I mean, the other person may be the most patient person in the world, and we may end up like getting all red-faced to them, and they just go, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, and they don't feel anything. But a lot of people, when they see the red face coming out of the car, they get red-faced right back, right? So I think, were you going to?
I had that exact experience when I was pregnant with my daughter. And
Uh-huh.
I was very, very pregnant. It was 3 days before she was born. And I kind of slid into this lady in front of me. I'm like, oh man. So I pull over. She walks back there. I'm trying to get out. I'm like, I can't just easily get out of the car at this point. She takes one look at me and she says, you have to be safer than that. And she left.
Oh.
That's a pretty good one. Did everybody hear that? Yeah. You know, and I mean, that's really magnanimous, right? Pardon? She said that when she was very pregnant, about 3 days before giving birth to her daughter Aspen, she backed into somebody, and by accident, and the woman came out of the car and came to her, up to her in the driver's seat, and said, you have to be safer than that, and left. I mean, it didn't really do much more because it was fine with kind of dealing with it at that level. I mean, if it's just a fender bender, maybe it isn't such a big deal. But if you've got a pretty major accident, you are going to have to deal with the other person and with kind of the reality, as I've said, is that you mostly have to keep your mind in check so that you're not doing it with this presumption of, that person being evil and horrible and why are they such an idiot driver and blah, 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 all that inner language that goes on, because then you've already messed it up. You know what's going to come out of your mouth, you know what you're going to do. But if you're more patient with it, if you're looking at it and going, this is a person who's just like me, I could be on the other end of it, right? Just as Amy was pointing out, I could be the person that accidentally goes into, the back of someone else. So we all are subject to being, in different positions in regard to accidents. So you might have a lot more space in your heart to just kind of meet them as another person, a suffering being. And then you resolve the situation as best as you can in the context of that. So I don't know. I mean, it mostly is about keeping your mind in check. The things that you say and do will follow from how the other person is and what needs to be done. And obviously, if it's an accident that requires you to deal with it, then you deal with it. But you deal with it with a calm mind. I had a little thing with a guy it was earlier this year in March, where I thought he had moved out because I saw his car moving forward and I was waiting to turn, and then I went forward and I didn't realize he hadn't gone. So I went right into the back of him. And so we just pulled over into the lot and went through it, and it was very calm, and he was very kind and not treating me in a way that was, really mean or whatever, on the basis of what I did to the back of his car. But things happen. So I don't know that it changes necessarily what transpires. It just changes by virtue of what we're doing with our mind. Now, in terms of seeing it as like our guru or as a precious teaching, well, everything's an opportunity then to practice patience, to practice just being much calmer in the face of whatever it is that we're confronting. That's a big enough lesson, right? That's a bodhisattva practice. There's without a doubt to use everything that we encounter as a means to become more patient, to become more understanding of the situation that others are in. So I don't know if it doesn't look like some wild, out of context thing. It just, we interact with others, but we do it with a much calmer mind, because we see that this is a learning opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to be with another being and use it in a much more positive way to have a much better outcome, hopefully. Now, if you're dealing with somebody who's not in that plane, who's just really belligerent and what have you, well, then it's going to be harder practice. It's going to mean that we have to keep going back to that place of being okay, being patient, being calm in the midst of them getting red-faced and doing whatever they're doing. Because even somebody who comes into the rear, you might accuse you of, well, you were driving too slow, and why are you driving so slow? Right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a set answer, because it's an interaction. But the most important thing is, if you're in the calm state where you're going, here it is. This is my opportunity today or this week or this month or this year to practice patience in a more profound way. Well, then you renew that attention to that. But it doesn't mean that you can have it just right off the get-go. That's why we have to meditate on these things. That's why we have to bring patience to mind. Meditating on patience is good, but without being tested on our patience, that meditation is pretty pointless.
Well, I think the key, well, what I did exercise.
Good.
It had nothing to do with him.
Right.
Her, I don't know who it was. Because I didn't stop. Because it wasn't that
Big a deal.
I don't think there wasn't any damage. But the patience was for me to watch my state of anxiety and stress and fear and rise up and then slowly come back down.
Yeah. So what Mark was saying was that his sort of practice was watching all of this sort of rise up and then eventually kind of come back down as with time, as well as just the thought processes in the mind. I guess, again, if we're really practicing well, then perhaps we don't go up so much or don't go up at all. We kind of quite even keeled in regard to it. You know, the emotional stuff doesn't come up so much because we're trained to sort of abide in a bit calmer place. You know, and to see it as, well, this is interesting. This is happening.
Well, that is a lesson, a guru lesson. Imagine what the mental state I would have would be if it didn't have any causal wave.
Yeah. It is good to imagine that, to think what would my mind be like to be in a very calm place in the midst of all of that happening. You know, that's kind of setting a goal for yourself, and then you continue to meditate on it and think about it. Sometimes it's useful to bring back into your meditation the times when you haven't been that and kind of imagine what it's like if you would have been different in that state. It's all imagination. You can't tell exactly what would happen because that's a past event, but it's useful to kind of say, well, what would have been more helpful thoughts to have? And these mind training ones are useful because they plant those seeds for those thoughts to come in, to say, oh, wow, here's a precious treasure for me. Here's a precious guru for me. Here's a wonderful opportunity for me to practice patience. Rather than saying, I'm just going to go down my habitual track of anger, frustration, and watch it, you know, arise and then eventually fall. Well, you still had that experience of that mind arising. You want to lessen that to some degree over time, but eventually get to the place where it doesn't arise at all. Yeah, 12:07, so yeah.
What do we do with positive experiences?
Oh, positive experience, again, was kind of like that Tonglen of giving those away. You know, not getting too caught up in them and thinking, oh, aren't I a great person? Look at all the great karma I've created because I've got this wonderful thing happening in my life. Give that away to others, you know. So I enjoy this. You'll get to enjoy it. You know, don't think you're getting shifted or whatever. You'll get your side of it. You will enjoy that food or that experience, but then think that you're going to share it with others. You're going to give it to others. That way it doesn't become all about the stingy, miserly kind of experience. You know, and if you can physically share it with others, great. You know, you win the lottery and you get, you know, $1 million or whatever, well then distribute it to the people that you know might benefit from that or something. It is useful. We're going to see that in regard to the verses from Shantideva, how our behavior should be all about trying to give what we can to benefit others and, you know, not take everything for ourselves. Okay, well, I feel like I've talked a lot today, lots of words. Let's go to page 235. Maybe before we do these prayers, just think back on today, and maybe, again, because it was a lot of words, it was a lot of stuff that we looked at, maybe there's one thing you can say, I'm going to try to practice this over the next few weeks before we have class again. We'll be back here on January 4th or 5th or something, 5th? 4th. For Sunday. I'm talking about the Sunday class. Yeah, we do have some things between them, but for the Sunday class. So you've got a couple of weeks here. Just one thing from today that you want to make a determination to practice and just settle on that if you can. If not, then do that after we leave here today to make sure that you have something that you can take away that you can say, I'm going to try that on. I'm going to actually use that and see what kind of results I get. This is what the Buddha advises us to do, right? Don't take the teachings as what they are on the basis of the Buddha having said them. Find out for yourself, check up. I'm sorry, Tony, did you?
Just real quick, because you just said, so this conflict I have been, and from verses 4 through 8, I'm ending up with, have I not been the cause of the result? in among the causes for the result of what has occurred.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm getting all
How can I be
that.
separate from the events that have happened?
Oh, right. Because of the karmic energy. So, yeah, and working with karma is one of the biggest ways that, yeah. So Tony was just saying that, yeah, and all these situations that he's looking at, you know, that we just went through in the 8 verses, the 4th through the 8th one in particular, you know, we're an active agent in creating all those, you know, through the force of our own karma. So to have that cognizance while we're doing that too, okay. Good, so having reflected on that, let's go forward on page 235, recite the first 2 verses there. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Turn forward to where there's a little paper clip there. It's page 245. It's got the paper clipped prayer. We have this new prayer that Rinpoche is advising us to do for His Holiness. We're going to do that prayer, and we're going back to 244 to the prayer at the bottom for Lama Zopa. As we recite these, think we're creating the causes for all teachers, all spiritual guides, to have good health and long lives, and for all their wishes to be fulfilled immediately. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then finally, just dedicate for anyone else who you're holding in your heart right now. We all have those who we know who are experiencing obstacles, who have illness. Perhaps we know those who are dying, or even have those who have died in our lives. Extend out this positive energy to all these beings who you're holding in your heart. And think that by virtue of what we've done here today, it removes all their suffering, and it becomes the cause for them to achieve perfect happiness. And may all beings find true happiness and peace through what we've done here today. Okay, thank you all. So